Hello, my name is Sean Kilpatrick, and I'm an intellectual property analyst here at the Eclipse Foundation. In this video, I'm going to present an introduction to the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property due diligence process. The Eclipse Foundation implements an intellectual property management policy based on a framework of established processes to ensure risk is mitigated in the open source software Eclipse projects deliver. The Eclipse Foundation has a well-defined intellectual property policy, corresponding IP due diligence process, and a dedicated team of professional IP specialists who perform the heavy lifting in the due diligence process. Eclipse Committers, the software developers who ultimately decide what will become project code and how an Eclipse open source project will leverage third-party content, are responsible for bringing IP issues to the attention of the Eclipse IP Team. The Eclipse intellectual property policy is concerned with establishing practices to mitigate legal risks associated with building products based on Eclipse software. This includes ensuring that the licenses on project code and third-party content are valid and compatible, ensuring that copyright and ownership of both project code and third-party content is well understood, and that the provenance of the content being distributed both directly and indirectly by Eclipse projects is properly tracked. This is a high-level overview of the evolution of the Eclipse Foundation IP policy. The Eclipse Foundation has always done more when it comes to intellectual property due diligence than any other open-source foundation or community. Indeed, we've always done more than many companies. As adopter and community expectations changed, we evolved our IP policy and supporting due diligence practices. We evolved the process from one of total serialization to total parallelism. In the beginning, we required that project teams engage with the IP team to fully vet all third-party content they need before it could be introduced into the project. We introduced a notion that we called parallel IP for incubating projects, and later expanded that to a wider range of projects. Today, the process is fully parallel, with the requirement that all content must be fully vetted by the IP due diligence process before the project can release. To scale, projects leverage work done on behalf of other projects, engaging directly with the Eclipse Foundation's IP team only when their assistance is needed. We evolved from the Eclipse Foundation keeping all records of use of third-party content in a separate database to moving intellectual property data closer to the code, and are moving to deploy SBOMs. Our primary focus since the beginning of time has been on technologies that have some clear notion of package, component, or module. Java jar archives or NPM modules are obvious examples. Projects consuming content from package managers like Maven Central require relatively large-grained IP due diligence. As we move into other areas, like Java runtimes via Eclipse Adoptium and operating systems via Eclipse Oniro and Eclipse Leda, IP due diligence requirements are becoming finer-grained and the diversity of licenses and relationships between licenses more complex. Let's take a look at the various parties that are involved in the Eclipse IP management process. The project team is the first party. Project content is authored and curated by committers using Git repositories that are managed and administered by the Eclipse Foundation. Adopters, or those individuals and organizations that consume Eclipse project content, either as end products or in source form, are the second party. External providers of content that is leveraged by the project team are the third party. Maven Central, NPM, JS, Yarn, and Golang repositories, and non-Eclipse Foundation projects hosted on GitHub are examples of third-party content. Content provided by external sources is considered third-party content regardless of how it is obtained by the project. Our due diligence process is concerned with the first and third parties, that is, the project and third-party content. Our process treats these different kinds of content in different ways. Generally speaking, third-party content is consumed directly from software repositories. If necessary and sensible, the binary or distribution form of third-party content can be stored in a project's Git repository. When a project stores the source code for third-party content in one of their Git repositories, they are effectively forking the content, and it must be treated as though it were project code. Project code submissions are broken down into three separate categories. Number 1, the initial contribution. The IP team will work with the project to resolve any provenance issues prior to the start of the IP review. Committers should ensure that necessary file headers are in place. Number 2. Significant contributions, defined as those containing more than 1,000 lines of code, received from the community as merge or pull requests, must also go through a full IP due diligence review. Number 3. Ongoing contributions from project committers, that is, the day-to-day work done by project committers, do not require further scrutiny. Committers can push their own day-to-day work directly into the project repository. When an existing project migrates to the Eclipse Foundation, we refer to the existing code, when it exists, as the Eclipse open source project's initial contribution. An initial contribution is basically the first set of project code contributions to the new Eclipse project. An initial contribution typically takes the form of an entire existing source code repository or some snapshot of an existing code base. In the case of an existing repository, the project team has some choices. Move the existing repository. At the project team's request, the Eclipse Foundation's IT team can move existing source code repositories on GitHub into an organization managed by the Eclipse Foundation. This is the best option when a project team wants to preserve their repository status with existing forks, retain existing issues, stars, etc. Note that GitHub does a good job of setting up redirects that will ensure that the project's existing community can find them. Or, push to a new repository. At the project team's request, the Eclipse Foundation's IT team can create new source code repositories on either GitLab or GitHub, into which the project team can push existing content. This option is best in the case that there is good reason to leave an existing repository in place, or when a project team needs to move an existing private repository into the open. The project team can decide whether or not to push the entire history or just a snapshot from the existing repository. As a best practice, an existing repository that gets left behind should be updated to include a pointer to the new repository and marked as archived. Combinations are also possible. As part of the Eclipse open source project creation process, the EMO asks the project team to capture their requirements and will facilitate discussion between the project team and the Eclipse Foundation IT team to implement those requirements. Note that all Eclipse open source project content must be kept in source code repositories that are managed by the Eclipse Foundation IT team. Our current options are GitLab or GitHub. All contributions provided to the project by people who are not committers, generally in the form of a merge or pull request, need to be vetted. Committers are the first line of defense in this. All Eclipse Foundation Git repositories have a hook installed that checks commits included in merge and pull requests to ensure that the author is covered by a contribution agreement. Contributors who are not committers must have signed the Eclipse Contributor Agreement, or ECA, before any of their contributions are merged by a committer. Committers are automatically covered by virtue of their committer agreement. We'll leave discussion of the various agreements for another session. Please note that anonymous contributions are not supported. If you have any reason to doubt the origin or provenance of a particular contribution, please contact the IP team for assistance. The purpose of the Eclipse Contributor Agreement, or ECA, is to provide a written record that contributors have agreed to provide their contributions of code and documentation under the licenses used by the Eclipse project or projects they're contributing to. It also makes it clear that contributors are promising that what they are contributing to Eclipse is code that they wrote, and that they have the necessary rights to contribute it to Eclipse projects. And finally, it documents a commitment from the contributor that their open source contributions will be permanently on the public record. All contributors who are not committers on the Eclipse project must sign the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. Eclipse committers do not need to sign the ECA. Contributions received from Eclipse committers are covered by their committer agreement. That is, if you have either signed the individual committer agreement or are covered by a member committer and contributor agreement, you do not need to sign an ECA to contribute to another. It's not wrong to sign the ECA if you're already covered by a committer agreement. It's just not necessary. The license compatibility and compliance focus for third-party dependency libraries is different than the process for project code. The Eclipse IP team reviews all third-party content on a license certification basis only, without an in-depth analysis of the content. When we say all third-party content, we mean all. It's recursive, applying to dependencies of dependencies all the way down the platform. The definition of platform varies from project to project, depending on the sorts of things the project is building. For most projects, the platform is either the operating system or the virtual machine upon which the project's products run. We employ a trust but verify approach. Eclipse project committers, as our first line of defense in the Eclipse IP due diligence process, must identify the licenses of the content that they adopt as they are adopting it, and ensure that the licenses of the content they use are compatible with the project license. As an Eclipse project gets closer to being ready to engage in a release, the project committers must confirm that the content they intend to include in the release is license compatible. The term third-party content refers to any content that is leveraged by the Eclipse project that is not produced and/or maintained as an asset of the project. This includes content from other Eclipse projects. This list is not exhaustive. The exact nature of the dependencies and how they are specified varies from technology to technology. The set of dependencies also includes third-party content that is referenced by third-party content, whether or not it is directly referenced by the Eclipse project content. That is, the dependencies of an Eclipse project includes the entire transitive closure of the immediate dependencies. The entire transitive closure is a bit of an overstatement. The pedantic listener will observe that one can follow the chain of dependencies all the way down to the silicon. We cut the dependency graph off at the platform. The definition of platform varies by technology and intention. In general, we regard the platform as the layer or layers that adopters of the Eclipse software install independently as a foundation for the project software. For example, for a Java-based application, the Java runtime would be the platform. For an application based on Jakarta EE technology, the application server would be the platform. For an NPM application, Node would be the platform. And for a native application, a Linux-based operating system, Windows, or Mac OS would be the platform. Once again, this list is not exhaustive. You can manually create a review issue. Indeed, there may be cases where you need to. Where possible, though, use the Eclipse-license tool to automatically create review requests. In this example, the Eclipse-license tool's command line version is being invoked on a yarn.lock file. In this case, the tool has identified some content for which it cannot find vetted license information. By adding the review switch, specifying an access token, and providing a project ID, this feature automatically creates review requests. You need to get an access token from the Eclipse Foundation's GitLab instance to use this feature. Don't share your access token. For more information about the Eclipse-license tool, see the video on the topic or visit https://github.com/eclipse/-licenses. Let's take a look at how license compatibility works under the Eclipse IP due diligence process. In the first example, we have a resource licensed under the EPL 2.0 license linking to another resource licensed under the LGPL 2.1 or later license. Is this relationship compatible? In this situation, we would say probably yes. In the second example, we have a resource licensed under the EPL 2.0 linking to another resource licensed under the GPL 2.1 only. Is this relationship compatible? The answer would be probably no. We say probably because it all depends on what you're trying to do. In both cases, further review by the IP team would be required. Again, committers are the first line of defense in the implementation of the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property due diligence process. Committers are covered by legal agreements that ensure that, among other things, they have the necessary rights to contribute the content that they create to Eclipse project repositories. Committers are responsible for ensuring that contributions of code made by others can be merged. Specifically, they need to ensure that the necessary rights have been conveyed by checking that contributors have signed the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. Committers are also our first line of defense when it comes to a project's adoption of third-party content. Committers must verify that the licenses of the third-party content they leverage is consistently covered by a license that is compatible with the project license. When the committer is not sure, they must connect with the Eclipse IP team for assistance. So exactly what types of content must be vetted by the Eclipse IP team? We must review all content that is contained in a project version control system or which can be downloaded from the project. Initial contributions must undergo a full due diligence review. Third-party libraries must also be vetted on a license and copyright basis. Many other contributions must also be vetted, such as contributions greater than 1,000 lines of code. IP Lab is a repository on the Eclipse Foundation's GitLab infrastructure that is dedicated to tracking the due diligence review process and conclusions for Eclipse project and third-party content. Issues on that repository are used to request reviews and track the review process and results. Data collected in IP Lab is used as a data source for the Eclipse-license database. Several templates are provided on IP Lab with detailed instructions for creating a request. Links are provided on the IP Lab landing page and in the Eclipse Foundation Project Handbook. Here, we're showing the creation of a request to review some project code. In this case, the requester is asking the IP team to review a pull request by providing the URL for the pull request as the source link in the description field. When filling out the form, just do your best. If something hasn't been specified quite right, the IP team will work with you to sort it out. Remember that, most of the time, especially when you need to review third-party content, the Eclipse-license tool can do this for you. While we have your attention, we've been using SPDX license identifiers for a while. Eclipse Committers have been including them in file headers, and the IP team has been using them to talk about licenses. Our current policy is that all source content that can have a file header must have a file header. Obvious exceptions are made for file formats like JSON that don't support comments, or cases where adding heads to generated code is challenging or is otherwise onerous. One of our challenges is that license scanning tools like Scan Code Toolkit see 3 licenses here. In the text, they will recognize the EPL and Apache licenses, but do not generally understand how they are combined. Scan Code does recognize the SPDX tag. We have to intelligently interpret the results. There are 2 ways to contact the Eclipse IP team when preparing to submit a contribution. You can create an IP Lab issue when you're not sure whether or not a license is compatible, or when you receive a contribution of more than 1,000 lines of code. Or, you can email us at emo-ip-team@eclipse.org if you're not sure about something related to intellectual property. Thank you for watching, and we at the Eclipse IP team look forward to working with you.